Hi, everybody. Just getting this thing fired up, and then we're going to discuss the latest forecast models for Tuesday. Looks like some of the latest forecast data is even suggesting a central or southern Mississippi is definitely going to be with the potential. I was looking at some of the SREF, HREF forecast models, some of the ensembles, and certainly does look like central southern Mississippi could have some issues. So let me get this fired up here. Just arrived in the Memphis area. I'm a little bit south of Memphis right now. Make sure everything's running again. Thank you, everybody, for joining me for this live update. I know I had some technical difficulties a little bit earlier today, back after picking up the Dominator 3. Now I'm down just to the south of Memphis, so we're going to be breaking down some of the latest forecast models. This is the 0Z HRRR model that obviously shows a storm developing out of northeastern Louisiana, moving all the way through central northeastern Mississippi, even into northwestern Alabama. That's, of course, going to be a potential long track supercell. Look at the front, the cold front coming in back behind everything. So all of these are prefrontal confluence lines. Basically, what makes these outbreaks so significant across the Mid-South is that it's not really the front, the actual cold front that's initiating the supercells, but it's these bands of converging winds that will develop out ahead of the cold front. And we're obviously going to get those. These prefrontal confluence lines are just factories of supercells, tornadic supercells, and it looks like a dominant prefrontal confluence line is going to be setting up from northeastern Louisiana all the way into central Mississippi, central and northern Mississippi. That is just going to be a fire hose of tornadic supercells that are going to continue to move off to the northeast with strong to potentially violent tornado potential. This is the latest HRRR. It's definitely showing a very concerning situation. Looks like the threat of a tornado outbreak is only increasing. And I also want to show you some ensembles, some forecast model ensembles. The HREF here is starting to shift a little bit further south. So this time right here, you can toggle this back and forth. Let me transition over to the ensembles. And these are convective allowing models, of course. Look at that, starting off mid-morning tomorrow. You're already starting to get some supercell storms into central Louisiana. A lot of times when these outbreaks begin across the Mid-South, usually you'll get your first tornado warnings across far southeastern Texas, sometimes into central Louisiana. And then it looks like as you go through the late morning hours, this is at 17Z, about midday. Looks like central and eastern Louisiana looks like the most favorable area. This is the maximum updraft helicity that's in central Louisiana moving into western Mississippi. You can see all these little plumes there. That's the maximum 2 to 5 kilometer updraft helicity. These are going to be very tilted storms too, so it's not going to pick up on all the rotating storms, but you can see that there's an abundance of rotating storms across central and southern Mississippi. And this is more of an ensemble as well, so it's kind of showing you the mean of all the different ensembles and also the max amongst the ensemble members. Right now I've chosen to predict to display the max updraft helicity, and look at that across central and southern Mississippi, and that is around 6 or 7 p.m. So one thing that I could see happening is that you could get the development of these supercell storms by late morning, by early afternoon across central and southern Mississippi. And once those develop, they could even choke off the low-level jet just a bit. And if that happens, then it could limit the tornado threat further north across northern Mississippi into northwestern Alabama. Looks like a lot of these ensemble members are showing a little bit greater tornado potential further south. eastern Louisiana, central and southern Mississippi. You can see all these different updraft helicity tracks. That's maximum updraft helicity in the 2 to 5 kilometer layer. And I am looking at the ensemble members. So these are means across the ensemble. But we're also going to take a look at the individual models as well. And I want to break down the trough shape. I'm a big fan of the shapes of these troughs as they eject and trying to pick out target areas. Maybe you might want to be a little bit further south. For example, if you have a subtropical jet interaction. So this trough here is the main trough, diving south through the Four Corners region before ejecting across the southern plains and eventually over the mid-south. It definitely has a subtropical connection. This little piece of strong middle and upper tropospheric winds, that's the subtropical jet, and that will tend to add shear vorticity at the base of the trough that helps to dig the trough. And if you have the perfect timing, the perfect interaction of those two jet streams, those two jet maxes, then you'll have this trough maintain its amplitude as it ejects from the southern plains and across portions of the mid-south. And it looks like central southern Mississippi, you might even have the greatest co-location of instability and low-level wind shear. Here is the 0Z HRRR. This is just the operational model, the 0Z. And let's start this at the beginning. Starting over again. This is going to be this morning, so tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., 8 a.m., you can see all these bubblers out here. They start to gradually increase in intensity. This one becomes a storm first, a supercell storm in northeastern Louisiana, and then it moves across central and northern Mississippi all the way up to the Tupelo area, eventually moving up into northwestern Alabama. And you're going to have multiple rounds of supercell storms. So once that first supercell initiates in northeastern Louisiana, moves all the way through northeastern Mississippi, northwestern Alabama, you get additional rounds of storms that will develop off of that prefrontal confluence line. And it's those prefrontal confluence lines that make these Dixie Alley setups so dangerous. And that's because the storms are able to move into that very strong low-level wind shear. There's going to be plenty of surface-based instability as well for this setup to be pretty substantial. I just arrived here just to the south of Memphis. I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and then blast off to the south. I'm probably going to target near Vicksburg, maybe up toward the Greenville area. You obviously don't want to get too focused on the individual storms with a model run like this. But by middle to late tomorrow morning, you're already going to have these bubblers going in central and northern Louisiana. And a lot of times with these outbreaks, when they begin, you'll get a couple early tornado warnings down over southeastern Texas, probably over central Louisiana as well. You oftentimes get a lot of supercell storms that like to initiate near the Alexandria area. Then it looks like by late morning into midday, some additional supercell storms could develop near the I-20 corridor near Monroe. And it sure looks like the ensemble models, you kind of take an average across all those different ensemble members. It does look like this environment across central and southern Mississippi is becoming increasingly favorable. There's a bit of a favorable trend toward tornadoes here across that environment. And what could happen is a storm could go up relatively early across northeastern Louisiana, go up into central Mississippi, and if you just have a long track monster supercell that develops by late morning through midday into the early afternoon, that could choke off the low-level jet, and you may not get a rapid expansion of the surface-based instability all the way up into the Memphis area. But the models are still showing that you're likely going to get surface-based instability by 6 or 7 p.m. all the way up through Memphis. I do think that there is going to be tornado potential further north, but it is possible that if these storms dominate from eastern Louisiana into central Mississippi, that they could act to choke off the low-level jet and prevent that deeper moisture from making it all the way up to the Memphis area. So right now it looks like an eastern Louisiana into central Mississippi type of an event. Long track supercell storms developing off of a very consistent prefrontal confluence line. But we also want to monitor the northward progression of the warm front as well, because these supercell storms are likely going to develop in an area where the greatest instability is located. They'll move off to the northeast, and then once they run into that wall of greater wind shear, they're likely going to become tornado-producing machines. And it does look like the models are slowing down a little bit, might even bring East Texas into play at least late morning into the early afternoon on Tuesday. Definitely central Louisiana. You're probably going to have those early tornado warnings, central northern Louisiana, even into south central Arkansas. This is at 16Z. We're going to step a little bit forward toward late morning. And look at that storm start to develop near Monroe. That's at about 11 a.m. when those storms first get going across the northeastern corner of Louisiana, moving very close to the Vicksburg area. Additional storms develop up near Greenville, just to the south of Tunica. Eastern Arkansas gets some additional storms. Look at this dominant prefrontal confluence line that basically extends across northern Louisiana all the way into central Mississippi. And this is just going to be a fire hose of supercells, a factory of tornadic supercells that are going to develop across northeastern Louisiana, move across central northern Mississippi with significant tornado potential. So that's at about midday. Look at this storm just dominating down near Alexandria. That's likely going to be a dangerous tornado producing storm. You also get storms that try to develop over southeastern Louisiana and across southern Mississippi. We go back over toward the dew points. These are the low 70s dew points, lifting all the way up to the I-20 corridor, then down through Jackson. This is at about noon Central Standard Time. And you can see that Jackson has about a 69 dew point, Vicksburg lifting up into the 70s. And a lot of times you'll get a funneling of that moisture. You'll get a little bit more rapid moisture return that'll happen up the Mississippi River Valley. That's likely going to happen as well up toward the Dumas area, southeastern Arkansas. You're likely going to get a rocket ship of moisture. But here by noon to 1 p.m., it looks like a big supercell is going to be anchored right along the warm front across north central Louisiana already by 19Z. So by 2 p.m., look at these holes within the moisture. Those are supercell storms that are ongoing in central Louisiana. We can go back over to the 0 to 1 kilometer EHI. We're definitely getting a slower trend. It seems like this system is starting to slow down a little bit. I'm probably going to have to wake up relatively early in the morning to head down potentially into northern and central Louisiana. But look at this environment. This is the 0 to 1 kilometer EHI field for 20Z. So we're looking at about 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. Probably are going to have a supercell storm ongoing central northern Louisiana. An environment out ahead of that becoming increasingly conducive for tornadic storms. You go to about 3 p.m. and look at that environment. Those colors get even brighter with the 0 to 1 kilometer EHI or Energy Helicity Index. That's basically a combination of the surface-based instability and your 0 to 1 kilometer shear. But look at this, surface-based instability makes it all the way up to the Memphis area by 3 to 4 p.m. So it might even happen a little bit earlier up into the Memphis area. Anywhere you get that gray or blue, that shows where there's surface-based moisture, surface-based instability available to these storms. But this is a very large, thick, warm sector. You can also see these prefrontal confluence lines that are visible within any field. If you look at Cape, surface-based Cape, you can look at dew points. You just see a lot of these streaks that are happening. And boy, the models are hinting at some of these storms going up early across southern Mississippi, maybe impeding a little bit of the instability into southern Mississippi and potentially impeding the instability axis and the low-level jet into northern Mississippi as well. But you can see the main parent warm front lifting all the way up into central Arkansas. This is the HRRR by about 4 p.m. And that warm front lifts all the way to the north of the Hattiesburg area, north of Meridian. All of that is close to 2,000 Cape in there across southern Mississippi, so that's also pretty substantial. And what will happen is these storms are going to initiate in the greater surface-based Cape, and then they're going to move into this environment with greater bulk shear and low-level wind shear. And you can see 40, 50 knots of 0 to 1 kilometer bulk shear just dominating the entire state of Mississippi, 5, 6 p.m. Look at that. It's going to be impossible not to get a tornado when these storms develop. And all of these little holes within that field, those are all those renegade supercell storms. Multiple bands of supercell storms, multiple rounds moving through. That's 5, 6 p.m., the entire state of Mississippi. And look at how those colors get brighter as you go towards 6 to 7 p.m. And one thing I'm noticing here too is that the HRRR is showing you that significant 0 to 1 kilometer bulk shear all the way down into southern Mississippi, even southeastern Louisiana. But you're definitely getting an environment that is very supportive of strong to potentially violent tornadoes. This looks like we got a clean sounding here, clean hodograph. Look at this incredibly curved hodograph right there. Your 1 kilometer wind up near 50 knots, and it's a south-southwest wind. Surface wind down near 10 knots. That's your surface wind, a due southerly surface wind at about 10 knots. So you have a 40 knot shear vector from your surface wind to your 1 kilometer wind, and that creates a very favorable hodograph for strong tornado potential. That's a textbook Dixie Alley hodograph for tornado potential. You have a northeast storm motion at about 40 knots, but not too far northeast. It definitely has a dramatic easterly component. That's because of the shape of the trough. The main trough is lagging a little bit further behind. That gives you those more westerly winds, forcing a more east-northeasterly storm motion. That's also largely due to that subtropical speed max, the subtropical jet right along the southern base of the trough. That's helping to create that speed shear, helping to dig the trough a bit. And within that core of that big bulk shear, 40 to 50 knot bulk shear, plenty of surface base instability. And you do have different degrees of these elevated mix layers, but it does look like you're going to have dry slots coming in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, about 3-4 kilometers. That's going to create plenty of surface heating and create a very volatile atmosphere for supercell storms. We can look at your significant tornado parameter. Let's go a little bit earlier in the afternoon. And this is at 20Z, and look at that SIG-TOR parameter across central and northeastern Louisiana. I would say that northeastern Louisiana is very much in play. That includes Alexandria up to the I-20 corridor, all the way back into southeastern Texas too, back toward Houston, up through the Texas piney woods. Definitely could have some significant tornado potential, especially into the early afternoon hours. Even though your low-level jet is weakening a little bit, your surface winds are southwesterly back into Texas. You still could get tornado potential there despite having more of a southwesterly surface wind. You definitely do get quite a bit of instability back there into southeast Texas late morning into the early afternoon hours. And you still do have a hodograph that is supportive of tornado potential with a southwest and northeast wind at about 40, surface wind due south at about 10 knots. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do see some tornado warnings further south down toward Houston up into the Texas piney woods. But look at those bright colors. You can certainly tell that that storm in central Louisiana at about 2 or 3 p.m., 40 to 50 knot low-level jet. In fact, the entire mid-south is dominated by a very large-scale low-level jet. By 3 p.m., look at that environment across western and central Mississippi into northeastern Louisiana. That is an environment that is absolutely ripe for strong to potentially violent tornadoes. And look at that environment expand all the way up into the Memphis area by about 4 or 5 p.m. Definitely getting that strong to potentially violent tornado potential all the way up into the Memphis area. But look at this environment across central Mississippi, northeastern Louisiana. Bright colors all over the place. That's an environment that is incredibly conducive for strong to potentially violent tornadoes. PDS tornado soundings all over the place. That right there, etch that into your head. That is the perfect hodograph for strong to violent tornado potential. I'm not seeing as much in the way of these elevated mix layers into central Mississippi, at least on the HRRR model, but very favorable wind shear. You can look at some of the numbers down here. All of those storm relative helicity numbers are greater than 300. So that's an environment that is very conducive for strong to potentially violent tornadoes. That 0 to 1 kilometer SRH number in this sounding, 337 meters squared per second squared, and the environment shifts into northern Mississippi as we go toward evening. Near sunset, that environment up Grenada, Tupelo, up toward Tunica, even up toward Memphis as well. You can see these big holes in the instability. Those are from clusters of storms. And it certainly is possible that if these storms are going to be dominating across central and southern Mississippi, that they could choke off a little bit of that really strong low-level shear into northern Mississippi. But you really can look at that environment even across northern Mississippi, and it just looks very conducive for strong to potentially violent tornadoes. And then we go into the overnight hours. It is possible that that portion of northwestern Alabama could also slide into the favorable tornado zone, 7, 10, 11 p.m. out here across western Alabama. The good news is at least the instability doesn't just rocket across the southeastern U.S. There is going to be an eastern limit to the instability axis across western Alabama. This is going into the midnight hour tomorrow night. Starting to see the potential increasing across southern Mississippi for a nocturnal event tomorrow night around midnight. Jackson up into central Jackson toward Meridian along the I-20 corridor, really between the I-10 corridor, I-20 corridor, and a little bit further north, even into northern Mississippi, but eventually compressing into southern Mississippi as we go through the overnight hours tomorrow night toward midnight into the early morning hours on Wednesday. I'm thinking that the tornado threat will finally start to subside by about sunrise on Wednesday down into central southern Alabama. Even the Florida Peninsula, the Florida Panhandle, could have tornado warnings as we move into Wednesday morning. 7 a.m. Wednesday morning. Still could have some tornado potential down into the Florida Panhandle. In fact, look at that photograph in the Florida Panhandle Wednesday morning. Still very supportive of tornado potential, and you still have these elevated mix layers too. Still little dry slots coming in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. So I do think that there is the potential of even an upgrade further, but obviously I think that the moderate risk would work fine, would certainly suffice, but just seeing such incredible agreement amongst all these models on an extreme parameter space and a lot of heating happening, wind shear, instability, basically every ingredient available to these storms. This is the 3-kilometer NAM, and look at all these waves as well as that strong low-level jet passing over a little bit of low-level stable air, creating these waves, gravity waves. It does look like central Mississippi northward does have greater low-level wind shear, and that's including the mid to later portion of the afternoon. There's the 3-kilometer NAM, 0Z. You go over to the HRRR. And boy, at 19Z, you're still around 200 0 to 1 kilometer shear, but really increasing across central Mississippi. Let's go to 21Z. So you do have greater 0 to 1 kilometer SRH, definitely from central Mississippi northeastward. So that would argue to kind of hang a little bit further northeast of the Greenville area instead of going all the way down to Vicksburg. It's definitely going to be one of those days where you're going to see those tornado warnings coming out of northeastern Louisiana, and you're going to have to decide, do you wait in Mississippi, wait in the Delta, or even along the I-55 corridor where there's a lot more forest land? Do you wait up across northeastern Mississippi where you know that the wind shear is going to increase above 300 or so by 5 or 6 p.m.? You got to have a lot of patience when you're chasing out here across the Mid-South. You can't just drive after every tornado warning. You have to be aware of the evolving environment, and that you have this low-level wind shear that ejects northeast through evening, but then after sunset, you get low-level wind shear that increases near and after sunset across southern Mississippi. So look at it ramp up once again down near Jackson, 7 p.m. You get that low-level wind shear ramping up once again. In fact, let's look at a forecast sounding at about 6 or 7 p.m. in Jackson. It's probably hard to find a good, clean, surface-based sounding here. But it does look like there could even be a late night tomorrow night nocturnal mode that develops out near Jackson area. This is at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, and you have this monster out near Leakesville, Hattiesburg. You've got supercell storms across northeastern Mississippi moving into northwestern Alabama. All of those will also have tornado potential. And you go after dark tomorrow night, and it just keeps going. Central Mississippi. This one continues into southern Alabama by 7 to 8 p.m. Just multiple modes, multiple bands, and the cold front still back here across eastern Arkansas into northern Louisiana. Look at that by 10 p.m. You still have tornado potential moving into western Alabama, southern Alabama, and you even get the development of another mode down in southeastern Louisiana at about 10 or 11 p.m. Tornadic supercell storms across southeastern Louisiana, near just to the west of New Orleans. And look at these prefrontal confluence lines that are setting up. These are areas of converging air that set up well ahead of the cold front. The main parent cold front at 4Z is still moving through central Arkansas. You've got prefrontal confluence lines. You've got a bit of a warm front as well. But within this environment, you just have that converging air that is just incredibly efficient at producing supercell storms. At least down across southern Mississippi after sunset, closer to midnight, at least the surface winds are more of a south-southwesterly direction, a little bit more backed. though, across northwestern Alabama. But at 18Z, look at all these southeasterly surface winds by about midday into early afternoon, just dominating western Mississippi. Usually you want to play the northern edge of these gradients, the deeper moisture, but you have upper 60s all the way up. And if you want to play the outer periphery of that moisture, that's usually where the most favorable co-location of instability and low-level wind shear will set up. And already start to see, and here's the moderate risk, everybody. Boy, it looks like it is a little bit further south, isn't it? That's the latest one. Seems to also be supporting that shift a little bit further south, with supercells developing out of northeastern Louisiana, moving across central Mississippi with a very favorable environment. Memphis is still in that enhanced area, but if these storms are able to dominate across central and southern Mississippi, they could potentially shunt the low-level jet or prevent those deeper dew points from making it all the way up into the Memphis area. But definitely is a threat of strong tornadoes all the way up to Memphis too. And I wouldn't be surprised if even here over southeastern Texas, if that is boosted up into an enhanced risk for late morning into the early afternoon hours. Wouldn't be surprised if the moderate risk is added into central Louisiana, Alexandria area, but really Monroe through Vicksburg, Greenville, Jackson. You are right in the middle of the moderate risk area in Jackson. Tornado probs, 15 hatch, and you do have that 10 hatch area all the way up into Memphis, almost all the way up to Jackson. And look at the 5% tornado threat, 2% even into southern Illinois, southern Indiana, western Kentucky, portions of western Kentucky, western Alabama, 5% tornado threat all the way back into East Texas too. Even Houston has tornado probabilities during the day tomorrow, but look at how far north those tornado probs go, Evansville, Carbondale area. But the max tornado probabilities, central Mississippi, northeastern Louisiana into central Mississippi. Threat of strong, violent tornadoes all the way up into Memphis area. But I do think that you're just going to have a dominant mode down here across central Mississippi that might help to shunt the low-level jet a little bit or prevent that moisture return from making it all the way up into the Memphis area. There you can see our instability, just waiting over the Gulf of Mexico. Coastal front just off Galveston, comes on shore a little bit over southern Texas. Still offshore, but this thing is going to come rocketing northward, and I think you're going to have more rapid moisture return also along the Mississippi River Valley. A lot of times that moisture will accelerate up the valley. You'll get a little bit of a funneling of the low-level jet as well, but there you can see the instability just waiting over that untapped Gulf of Mexico. As I mentioned, this system has a subtropical connection that's also very important. I think we're starting to get some neutral, if not warmer, sea surface temperatures into the eastern tropical Pacific, so we're starting to get a little bit more active of a subtropical branch. But this is the main trough coming from the Pacific Northwest, dives down, amplifies near the Four Corners region, and it's because of the interaction with this subtropical jet, enhancing the shear vorticity, deepens the system so it reaches max amplitude as it moves through the eastern U.S. Instead of reaching max amplitude over the southern plains and then lifting up to the Great Lakes region, and that just kind of drags more veered low-level flow across the Mid-South, this one maintains its amplitude well into Dixie Alley, and that's going to be key for this outbreak to really ramp up. That leads to a low-level jet that's a very large-scale low-level jet, well into the instability too. So a pretty textbook trough ejection. Tornado outbreak potential appears quite likely, but the threat does appear to be increasing a little bit further south. As supported by these ensembles. 4-hour max updraft helicity. It does seem like these storms try to dominate down across southern Mississippi. So Jackson does seem to be right in the heart of the moderate risk area. Latest Storm Prediction Center outlooks do support that too. Mean SRH across the models. This is 0 to 1 kilometer. Mean SRH across the different ensemble members. Look at how much stronger that low-level wind shear is across central and northern Mississippi. That's at 21Z. You go towards 0Z and it even increases a little bit into southern Mississippi, southern Alabama. Probably the gradient is going to be the most favorable target. I'm thinking the southern gradient of the strongest 0 to 1 kilometer shear, the northern gradient of the greatest instability, somewhere right across central Mississippi, with that fire hose of a prefrontal confluence line just rocketing supercell storms from northeastern Louisiana across this very favorable environment. Let's take a look at the 3 kilometer NAM really quick. And I am going to be storm chasing this entire setup, of course. I'll set up my live stream pretty early in the morning. Probably head down toward the Jackson area. This is at about 18Z. These are all going to be elevated up here across southeastern Arkansas and northern Mississippi. And look at these prefrontal confluence lines that set up across eastern Louisiana into southwestern Mississippi. It's possible even that you could get initiation by 18 or 19Z in Mississippi, but it does look like it tries to set up this dominant prefrontal confluence line right across northeastern Louisiana into western Mississippi. You can probably see it in the moisture field. You can kind of see them in the temperature field too, with these little cloud streaks. Appears that northeastern Louisiana also has some of these prefrontal confluence bands that develop. Very favorable sounding. And the NAM models do have a more robust elevated mix layer, so you get these little dry slots. This is the dew point line in green, the temperature is in red. And where you get those two lines to separate, that's where you get more dry conditions. When they're coming up here at about 4 or 5 kilometers, that's an elevated mix layer in the middle troposphere that acts to steepen the lapse rates a bit. But a lot of very favorable instability, very favorable low-level wind shear, strongly curved photograph supportive of strong to potentially violent tornadoes, even by the 3 kilometer NAM. And that's out near the Vicksburg to Greenville area. Good news, a little bit of good news for Memphis is that at least the moderate risk has shifted a little bit further south. Jackson's right in the middle of it. And the 3 kilometer NAM tries to initiate these renegades even across western Mississippi, southwestern Mississippi. And by about 4 to 5 p.m., might even get some of these to initiate across southeastern Mississippi into western Alabama. These are likely going to be elevated across western Mississippi, western Tennessee. And at about 5 or 6 p.m., the 3 kilometer NAM also has these back toward Jackson potentially bubbling up. and the trough finally arrives. This is at 0Z. Here is the parent trough, but this subtropical connection here is really going to be key to generating these storms along prefrontal confluence bands. You're going to need that convergence well ahead of the front. The main trough is lagging a little bit behind, but that allows these more westerly upper level winds to prevail over the warm sector. That leads to more east-northeasterly storm motions, more favorable low-level wind shear. And look at this large low-level jet that develops out ahead of that because of that parent trough that's interacting with the subtropical connection. And the ribbon, that strong low-level jet, all the way through 0Z, extends down even into eastern and southeastern Texas, central Louisiana. Definitely could have some potential. You can see that low-level jet extending all the way down even at 0Z tomorrow. So, but a huge low-level jet downstream of a trough configuration like that. Let's see what the WRAP shows. The WRAP is one of our favorite models here at Team Dominator. Let's see what it shows for 21Z tomorrow. We'll just go right to the 0 to 1 kilometer EHI. This is at 3 p.m. tomorrow. And boy, the WRAP is slowing down a little bit too. It has that western trend. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up in Louisiana on this event. Possibly northeastern Louisiana, maybe out toward Monroe, maybe Monroe to Vicksburg, maybe up toward Greenville, maybe to Jackson. Maybe we'll work the I-20 corridor a bit more. This is at 21Z, so about 3 p.m. WRAP model near Vicksburg. Very favorable sounding, 70 over 68. And you can definitely see that environment getting increasingly favorable across southern Mississippi too. But looks like the WRAP is also supporting this southern trend with time as we go through the day. So I do think that we're probably going to end up down near Jackson tomorrow. WRAP model. There's a 0 to 1, or excuse me, a 0 to 3 kilometer NAM. Definitely does show this very favorable environment all the way back into Louisiana. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up in Louisiana tomorrow. Seems like the HRRR is a bit more progressive with that environment, but kind of an outlier. So we might have to end up down near Vicksburg with this southeastern trend that's happening. But the HRRR is definitely the most aggressive with the instability, lifting up across central Mississippi. Very favorable environment, strong long track tornadoes. You definitely want to have your family severe weather safety plan dialed in across the entire state of Mississippi, especially central Mississippi, even southern Mississippi, large sections of Louisiana, even southeastern Texas, southeastern Arkansas. And you also have this favorable blob of a favorable environment into northern Mississippi too that tries to materialize. So thank you everybody for tuning into this weather report. Looks significant. Right now what I'm seeing with the evening new model runs is that maybe a little bit of a head south tomorrow morning could be in the cards down toward the I-20 corridor, a little closer to the I-20 corridor, Vicksburg, Greenville, out toward Jackson. Multiple rounds of supercell storms. So you're going to have round after round, and it's going to be this fire hose of a prefrontal confluence line. You can see it right there. Central Louisiana into the northeastern part of the state. That's just going to continue to generate those supercells, and they're going to move into this environment across western Mississippi, and they're going to produce tornadoes as they do. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in to this weather report. Stay safe tomorrow. Hit that notification button because I'm going to be storm chasing live the entire day tomorrow. We did retrieve Dominator 3 up in South Dakota. You're going to be seeing the Dominators back out in the field this spring. Hopefully all 3 Dominators. That would be the plan, to get all 3 back out in the field one more time. But thank you, everybody. We got to get through the day tomorrow. Tornado outbreak appears likely across the Mid-South here to close out November.